She was wearing a white wedding dress, holding a loaded gun in a bloody bunker, just 20 minutes after saying, "I do." Alasara was trapped in a reinforced safe room. Her mafia husband was bleeding out from a gunshot wound right in front of her. As the cartel blew the bunker door off its hinges, this quiet librarian prepared to pull the trigger to defend her man. Here is the shocking climax of Boston's deadliest gang war. Bro, you and I are about to dive into some absolute peak drama today. We are talking next-level survival and the toll it takes on a person. Picture this. It is super late under those buzzing grocery store lights. The camera zooms in on our girl, Ara. She is exactly 1 second away from totally crashing, shaking like a leaf from pure fear. Her knees give out, but she never hits the floor. Enter Nikolai. This absolute unit of a mafia boss catches her like it is nothing. He instantly spots the dark bruises on her neck, and without even blinking, he just decides she is his now. Crazy, right? Look, life teaches us a wild lesson here. Sometimes, getting away from the toxic monster chasing you means you have to fall straight into the arms of an even darker one. Look closely at her hands, guys. Her knuckles are dead white, gripping that cheap plastic basket. That shaking is not just nerves, it is straight up trauma and hardcore starvation. She takes these agonizing 4-second breaths, practically begging her own body to keep it together. Her ribs are on fire, a brutal reminder of Bram, the garbage human who slammed her into a wall 2 days ago. Notice how she nervously tugs at her black cashmere turtleneck? Yeah, Bram bought her that right after the attack, crying and begging for forgiveness like a total coward. But soft wool cannot scrub away a betrayal like that. Honestly, this is a harsh reality we all have to face sooner or later. An apology bought with an expensive designer gift is never actual love. It is just a heavier, prettier chain to keep you completely locked down. When that basket finally slips from her fingers, it is a total system failure. Her entire mind is shattering right alongside those eggs on the cold linoleum floor. For months, she has survived Bram and his absolutely suffocating control. He drained her bank accounts and forced her onto a scale, turning her own reflection into a psychological weapon. She barely survived on stolen library scraps and bitter black coffee, but honestly, the human heart can only take so much darkness before the lights just shut off. As she blacks out, the hands that suddenly grab her are not shaking with panic at all. These are the steady hands of an absolute apex predator claiming his turf. Life is wild like that. Sometimes hitting rock bottom and completely breaking down is the absolutely terrifying yet necessary first step to finally being truly seen by someone. As her vision slowly boots back up, watch how she reacts to this new guy. His voice is this low, steady hum that completely anchors her spinning mind. She looks up and sees his charcoal coat and the unblinking eyes of a literal wolf sizing up its catch. He holds her with zero hesitation, moving like a boss who commands the oxygen in the room. He does not even ask for her name. Instead, he instantly demands to know when she last ate, flexing pure, unfiltered authority. Ara stares at his brutally sharp features, overwhelmed by his unyielding dominance. Terrified, she uses her classic survivor instinct and whispers that she is totally fine. We have probably all been there. We build these fragile little shields, lying to ourselves that everything is perfectly fine, even while our entire world is burning straight to the ground. Listen up, because you and I need to watch this absolute boss move. Nikolai does not give her a shoulder to cry on. Instead, he looks dead at Ara and states, with zero emotion, that she is totally wrecked. It is so cold and clinical that his total lack of pity actually short-circuits her brain. When she tries to pull away, he overpowers her effortlessly. He drops pure logic, warning her that if she trips again, she is hitting the floor. It is a crazy flex that makes him her only survival option. Ara just gives up the fight, letting this walking red flag guide her to a bench. Here is a real-life lesson for you. Sometimes, when you are completely burned out from fighting, stepping into the shadow of a bigger threat is the only way to catch your breath. Nikolai crouches down, locking onto her eyes, and tells her to stay put. When a heavy hitter says, "Stay, you stay," her brain is totally fried, so she just obeys. But the second he steps away, her toxic past crashes back. Her phone starts buzzing like crazy. It is Bram, texting her garbage demands that wrap around her throat like a chokehold. Ara is shaking, but before she completely spirals, Nikolai is back. He cracks open a juice bottle, shoves it into her hands, and orders her to drink. You simply do not say no to a guy with this much lethal energy. He watches her sip, fixing her messed up state with scary efficiency. Which brings us to a solid life lesson. True, terrifying power never actually has to raise its voice to make people fall right into line. He stays in this predatory crouch, totally balanced and ready to strike. Ara finally realizes this guy is built for war. His tailored suit barely hides the fact that he is a human weapon. She mutters a tiny thank you, but he completely ignores her. Guys like him do not care about manners. Instead, his pale eyes lock onto her throat. She panics and tries to cover her neck, but it is too late. His calm mask completely shatters. An intense territorial anger takes over his face, and he demands to know who hurt her. She tries to feed him some garbage lie about tripping and falling. Big mistake. Lying to the literal devil is the absolute worst move you can make. Life lesson here. The dark will always uncover the deep wounds we try so desperately to hide from the rest of the world. Let us get into Ara's headspace here. Nikolai hits her with one piercing look, and it deletes every single wall she has up. Playing dumb does not work on a wolf that already smells blood. He drops his voice to a lethal whisper, asking who did this. Everyone ignored her pain for 8 months, but this mob boss sees it instantly. He drops some dark lore, mentioning he watched his own mom die when he was 9. Villain origin story unlocked. He is a protector who uses violence as his tool. Then her phone totally ruins the moment. Bram is yanking the leash again. This shows us exactly how toxic cycles actually work. The deep trauma inside of us never magically disappears. It just quietly waits around for a brand new shadow to hide itself inside. The second Bram's name comes up, Ara's entire body blue screens. She cannot even articulate how he loved to mentally torture her. But Nikolai reads her shaking hands like a neon sign. He straight up demands her phone. She freezes, terrified, but his boss tone forces her to hand it over. He reads through Bram's unhinged texts with an insane serial killer level of calm. Then, the ultimate plot twist happens. The phone actually rings. Nikolai picks it up, looking like the literal Grim Reaper. He smoothly drops his name and tells Bram his punching bag is permanently gone. Stick with me on this one, guys. You can learn a massive life lesson from this quiet flex. Actual, terrifying power never needs to scream to make everyone in the room hold their breath. Nikolai speedruns, establishing dominance on the phone. He tells Bram that even looking for Ara is a deadly insult. He sets the rules. Pack her stuff, put it outside. If a single thread is damaged, somebody will bleed. Savage. When he tosses the phone back, Ara loses it. Her traumatized brain thinks he just triggered a massive revenge plot. She is hyperventilating. Nikolai drops down again, locking those scary ice eyes onto hers. He hits her with the absolute hardest truth bomb. Abusers are just pathetic. pathetic cowards who only act tough when you are completely helpless. He promises to be a literal wall of violence between her and Bram. Here is the lesson. Fear loves to thrive in the dark, but it completely shatters the second it slams into someone who is absolutely certain. Ara is staring at this absolute unit who deleted her toxic life in under 5 minutes. Why is he even doing this? He casually claims it is just because she needed help. Yeah, right. A violent savior complex is usually just a predator claiming a new prize. He describes his criminal empire using boring corporate buzzwords like logistics and conflict resolution. When he says calling him a mafia boss is an insult because he is way bigger, Ara totally short-circuits. She wants it to be a sick prank, but looking at his chill posture, the horror sets in. This dude literally orders hits with a ballpoint pen. It is a massive reality check for all of us. The lesson here is simple. True monsters do not hide in dark alleys. They wear expensive custom suits and speak in quiet, chilling whispers. Ara totally panics, whispering that she absolutely cannot get dragged into his insane mafia life. Nikolai's comeback is a masterclass in toxic control. He basically tells her his criminal empire does not need her help or permission. He just offers her this pure business-like safe house. Eat his expensive food, sleep behind his bulletproof doors, and get her broken mind right. It sounds like safety, but survivors always know there is a hidden tax. When she tries to say no, he hits her with a crazy ultimatum. He promises to absolutely destroy Bram, but says she will still have to go back to that nasty apartment alone. Her burnt-out body makes the call for her. You and I both know that sometimes survival forces us to make the wildest deals, trading a rusty cage for a gilded one. Picture the exact frame where a human soul just totally rage quits. We get this tight shot of Ara, and guys, she is going through it. Her oversized coat barely hides the nasty bruises that absolute trash bag Bram left all over her. She is freezing, starving, and shaking like a leaf under a busted street lamp. When she finally whispers she gives up, it is heartbreaking. Enter Nikolai. Bro just reaches out with this massive hand, literally pulling her from the wreckage, and tosses her into his tinted-out luxury sedan. That heavy door slams shut with a terrifying thud, blocking out the cold. But here is the brutal reality of the situation. The exact second you trade your personal freedom for a shiny, powerful shield, your life changes forever, and the open sky is nothing but a memory. Let us look at the sheer whiplash of this scene. An hour ago, Ara was desperate for a single meal. Now, she is strapped into a leather seat next to an underworld kingpin who radiates this terrifying, icy calm. You and I are watching the exact birth of a tragedy here, that fatal moment when someone mistakes a gilded cage for the open sky. Nikolai leans in, his voice stupidly low, promising his penthouse will be her shield. Right on cue, her phone aggressively buzzes. It is Bram, blowing up her screen with toxic threats and pathetic apologies. Her panic spikes instantly, freezing her in place. Honestly, it teaches us a pretty rough lesson about moving on. You can never truly start healing while the poison from your past is still actively pumping through your veins. In one smooth move, Nikolai snatches the phone from her shaking hands and kills the power. The silence in that car drops like a concrete block. Arasa stares at him, paralyzed between terror and an intoxicating wave of relief. Why would a dude built entirely on violence want to be her shield? The lighting shifts, half his face dipping into shadows. As he drops that his mom was murdered when he was a kid, Bro has a classic tragic hero complex, trying to save his past by saving Ara. She whispers an apology, and his jaw practically turns to stone. It is wild, but it highlights a painful truth for all of us. The deep scars we get in our youth do not magically vanish into the dark. They secretly become the solid foundation of who we grow up to be. Cut to Nikolai and his massive penthouse. We are talking a fortress of cold glass and marble floating above the harbor. The elevator chimes, and waiting in the foyer is Mira, an older housekeeper whose sharp eyes miss nothing. Nikolai totally dominates the room's voice, echoing as he announces Ara is staying. Our girl shrinks, her shoulders curling inward. But then Mira steps up. Her touch is super gentle, offering a hot meal and a safe bed. The sheer weight of that kindness breaks Ara, making her choke out apologies just for taking up space. It hits on a terrifying paradox we sometimes face. In our absolute darkest moments, the only way to survive the monster you know is to blindly put all your trust in the monster you do not. The camera trails Alara down a shadowed hallway. She steps into a massive, softly lit bedroom, the thick rugs totally eating her footsteps. It looks like a VIP spa, but the tension in the scene is screaming red flags. The scariest predators out there do not bother with physical force. They just drown you in sudden, overwhelming safety. Mira opens up a cedar closet, packed with clothes in the exact size for Alara. Nikolai already planned everything, completely bypassing her emotional defenses. She is visibly confused. Why is the apex predator feeding a broken stray? The framing slaps us with a very hard truth about life. The most absolute, unbreakable forms of control in this world are almost always perfectly disguised as totally unquestioning generosity. Stick with me here because this is where the drama really kicks off. Mira drops a casual law bomb, confirming Nikolai has a dark obsession with hunting guys who hurt women. Bro is a literal lethal savior. When Alara finally pushes that heavy door shut and hears the lock click, she just crumbles. She hits the floor, crying her eyes out. Honestly, your body only lets you completely break down when it knows you are finally safe. Hours later, she wakes up in expensive silk sheets, smelling roasted garlic. But scan the room, guys. Look at the wide shot. 0 phones, 0 clocks anywhere. She is trapped in a beautiful, timeless void. It teaches us a crazy lesson. Total, comfortable isolation is the absolute fastest way to make someone forget the outside world entirely. The bathroom lighting is totally unforgiving. Alara stares at her reflection, tracing the nasty bruises shaped exactly like Bram and his garbage hands on her neck. She pulls her collar up and ghosts into the kitchen. Mira is at the stove, and the quiet clinking of dishes feels weirdly peaceful. She slides a bowl of steaming broth in front of Alara. The smell makes her empty stomach twist. She grips her spoon so hard her knuckles turn white, fighting the feral urge to inhale the food. Mira rests a warm hand on her shoulder, softly telling her to take it easy. It is a quiet moment, but it drops a massive truth bomb for us. True healing is never some fast sprint to the finish line. It is the incredibly slow, painful work of just learning how to breathe normally again. Suddenly, Nikolai strolls into the kitchen. He ditched the suit and is rocking this terrifyingly calm wolf in its den vibe. Ice clinks in his crystal glass. When Alara stammers out a shaky thank you, he just waves it off. He does not want her gratitude, guys. He wants her completely dependent. Leaning on the counter, he drops an absolute nuke of a plot twist. Bram is gone, chased out of the city by guys who do not ask nicely. The camera pushes in on her shocked face. Nikolai casually adds that if her ex ever returns, he is a dead man. She clutches her soup bowl, stunned by how easily her savior talks about murder. It proves a wild point about human nature. Absolute power over others usually hides a deeply broken soul, but to a desperate victim, It looks exactly like heaven. You and I are literally watching the invisible strings of dependency get tied in real time. Alara looks up, her voice cracking as she admits she is just as terrified of him as she was of Bram. Instead of playing the good guy, Nikolai just nods. The dim lighting highlights the cold, brutal honesty in his eyes. He is feeding her the insane drug of truth, flat out refusing to pretend he is some hero. This gives us a major reality check. The most inescapable traps in life are not built with sweet lies, they are built with dangerous truths. He stands there, this massive shadow, before completely pivoting. He casually asks about her job at the city archives. That normal question yanks her back to reality, grounding her panic, while his presence keeps her locked firmly in his orbit. Watch how the director frames this fake freedom. Nikolai tosses her the phone to call her boss, but his intense stare silently dictates every word she says. When she freaks out about her coworkers asking questions, his voice drops into a lethal register, casually threatening to bury the whole archive if they snoop. Boom, the perimeter is locked down. Over the next few days, a quiet routine settles over the penthouse. Honestly, routine is exactly the heavy glue needed to put a shattered mind back together. She sleeps for hours, stares out at the ocean, and cries quietly. Meanwhile, Nikolai plays the distant king in his office. He is deliberately giving her the exact quiet space she needs, so the roots of her dependency can dig permanently into her chest. Notice how incredibly soft the inside of this iron cage is. Nikolai does not crowd her and ignores her past. He knows that when someone has been crushed by pressure, removing that pressure is the ultimate trap. On day 3, he hands her a brand new phone. He ported her contacts but entirely scrubbed Bram, casually dropping that he blocked 20 missed calls. Guys, this is horrifying control wrapped up as a thoughtful gift. Alara sits by the massive windows, making exhausting calls to her friends. She spins a believable lie about needing a mental break, claiming she is totally fine. It shows exactly how fast our reality gets rewritten by isolation. Every single word coming out of her mouth is entirely overshadowed by a criminal king pulling the strings from the next room. Her friends beg her to crash with them, but Alara smoothly turns them down. The brainwashing is already working. By Friday, Nikolai and his guys drag in her boxes of stuff. The visual contrast is insane. Her ratty sweaters dumped on his $1 million couch. That night, the vibe shifts. He calls her to this massive dining table, the candlelight making him look like a movie villain. He pours wine and asks why she became an archivist. She looks down, mumbling that she likes protecting fragile things from being forgotten. The irony here is loud, and it hits on a deep truth. We are ultimately defined by the things we choose to protect. Nikolai just stares at her, unblinking, because to him, she is not a person. She is just a broken artifact he gets to keep locked in his dark vault. Let us look at this piece by piece. You and I are going to unpack the birth of a wild trauma bond. The camera tracks down the harsh aisles of a grocery store. Ara kept her head totally lowered, craving that invisibility abuse survivors desperately need. But Nikolai spotted her instantly. He catalogued the fading bruise on her cheek, like a wolf spotting a fractured bone. This guy did not just buy her a meal, he secretly secured her a job, surgically removing her daily panic. To a healthy mind, this silent orchestration is absolutely terrifying. But to a shattered spirit, it tastes exactly like pure salvation. The simple life lesson we learn today is that the most dangerous traps are almost always disguised as unexpected generosity. The heavy iron hook was officially set in the dark, and she had zero clue. The scene cuts to the suffocating warmth of an expensive dining room. Ara sat trembling across a heavy oak table from a man smelling of rich cologne and old blood. Yet his voice was smooth glass. When she nervously asked how she could ever repay him, Nikolai simply smiled. He told her kindness was a gift, not a balance sheet. It is a devastating psychological trick. He forced her mind to split, weighing the terrifying rumors of his criminal empire against the warm plate of food right in front of her. He admitted his past cruelty, framing it as harsh necessity, whispering that he was saving her because the world had refused to save his own mother. It teaches us a vital life lesson. The most convincing lies are always wrapped tightly around a core of broken truth. The camera lingers on Nikolai's rigid posture as he swore he would never let history repeat itself. He played the flawless savior perfectly. Overwhelmed, Ara wept, confessing she was grateful she had collapsed in his presence. Over 3 quiet weeks, he became her entire atmosphere. Her physical bruises faded, and her night sweats vanished. But behind those heavy curtains, her free will was bleeding out on the floor. They traded carefully painted tragedies over expensive dinners. Neither spoke of her past abusers, nor the violent mafia empire paying for their wine. The life lesson here is simple but harsh. We often build massive walls to keep the absolute worst monsters out, completely forgetting that those exact same heavy walls will trap us inside forever. Winter cast a cold light through the penthouse glass. They sat inches apart while the movie played. That small gap acted like a tightly stretched wire. When Ara softly noted it was her favorite film, Nikolai casually admitted he had already studied her private shelves. To a steady heart, stepping into someone's life uninvited is a massive red flag. But Ara was completely submerged. She felt radiating heat exactly where sheer terror should have been, tragically confusing a hunter's tracking for a lover's care. His ice blue eyes pinned her to the sofa. He dropped his voice to a velvet murmur, sliding his final piece into a dark checkmate. The life lesson is crystal clear. True danger rarely approaches with a raised fist. It usually arrives holding something you already deeply love. You and I have probably both watched someone mistake blinding intensity for real devotion. This is the climax of his dark psychological theater. Nikolai leaned forward, his heavy frame crowding her space. He murmured softly that he was already in love. Before she could flinch, he stole her weapons. He admitted it was too fast, that a mob boss with bloody hands should never touch a girl like her. By speaking aloud every warning her gut was screaming, he painted himself as painfully honest. He claimed his deep hunger started the very moment she looked at him with pure fear. He offered this dark truth like a precious gift. The simple life lesson here is that a mind heavily trained in chaos simply cannot tell the difference between falling in love and a silent panic attack. Watch the carefully calculated tremor in his jaw when he quietly offered to pack her bags. It was a flawless display of engineered vulnerability. A smart predator never points to an open cage unless he knows the bird's wings are completely broken. He swore that if she stayed, she would never know regret. Ara stared up at the man who had slowly erased her entire world. She truly believed his deep shadows were a warm blanket. The cement finally dried. Her small hand reached up, tracing his jaw as she whispered she belonged there. The kiss was not romance. It was a total transfer of human ownership. His heavy hand clamped tight behind her neck. The life lesson is real. We so often close our eyes, mistaking the sickening rush of a permanent freefall for the absolute magic of flying. Tears spilling over her lashes, Ara confessed her deep love a beautiful symptom of her silent captivity. Nikolai pulled back just enough to wash his hands clean. He warned her his soul was black, and the men hunting him showed zero mercy. This is exactly how the devil sleeps at night. He makes you hold the pen before you sign your life away. Ara decided his open violence was honorable compared to the hidden abuse of her past. She sobbed that goodness did not matter, only the truth. Here is the massive life lesson. When your entire life has been a war zone, a well-lit prison feels exactly like absolute peace. He crushed his mouth against hers, officially sealing her fate. 4 months later, these invisible emotional chains would finally turn into solid steel. The camera frames them in the dim light of an old library. He guided her toward the new wing, stopping before a brass plaque etched with her name. His mafia wealth bought every single brick. It looks like a modern fairy tale, but it is the ultimate act of total consumption. By purchasing her only sanctuary, he locked the final door of her cage. He stood directly behind her, hands sinking heavily onto her shoulders. As she broke down in gratitude, he slid a massive sapphire ring onto her finger. The dark stone matched his cold blue eyes, a permanent brand upon her flesh. He did not drop to a knee. He simply told her she was going to be his wife. Here is the brutal life lesson. If you paint the iron bars in solid gold, the prisoner will eagerly turn the key themselves. For 3 quiet days, Ara floated through a pristine illusion of romance. Then his phone buzzed. The image was absolutely chilling. A photo of Ara walking down his private driveway, with red sniper crosshairs painted over her face. The text promised to take what he loved most. The phone slipped from her trembling fingers, hitting the marble floor. Nikolai snatched it up. Notice the instant change in his body. The gentle fiancée dissolved, leaving behind a cold warlord evaluating a direct threat to his property. He demanded answers, his voice completely devoid of panic or human warmth. The life lesson becomes undeniably clear right here. A life built on violence will always demand a brutal, bloody toll. Her beautiful fantasy finally shattered into jagged pieces on the floor. Watch the grim reality of their power dynamic unfold. Ara collapsed inward, paralyzed by the proximity of death. Nikolai did not hold her to comfort her. He simply took command. His hand clamped firmly around her arm, pulling her swiftly out the door. His phone was already pressed to his ear. He snapped cold directives for grid surveillance, entirely blind to the hot tears streaming down her cheeks. He pushed her into the shadowed back seat of a waiting black sedan. She folded into the dark leather without a whisper of protest. He barked relentless orders. Before turning his icy gaze back to her, we learn a harsh life lesson quickly. In the darkest moments of life, absolute control looks terrifyingly similar to genuine protection. She just sat there, silently suffocating in pure terror. The air inside the sedan felt as heavy as wet concrete. He commanded her to look at him, and the sharp words hit like a physical blow. Ara's head snapped up on pure instinct. Staring into eyes completely drained of human warmth, he ruthlessly interrogated her about every shadow she might have missed. Sobbing quietly, she confessed that she had not been watching the streets. She had only been looking at him. He expertly shifted the heavy blame onto his own shoulders, painting himself as the tragic figure who brought a rival's deadly violence to her doorstep. Notice the profound irony and the life lesson it brings. When we are completely shattered, we beg for comfort from the exact person actively destroying us. Her trembling fingers reached out to grip his violently tense fist. You and I might wonder how a fragile soul justifies loving a man hunted by assassins. As the elevator opened, the nightmare was laid bare. The romantic penthouse was replaced by a militarized bunker swarming with heavily armed men. The lighting turned bone chillingly cold. A scarred soldier reported that a dark vehicle had trailed her every move. The muscles in Nikolai's back went rigid. To a mob boss, being outmaneuvered is worse than death. He barked loud orders for live camera feeds. Then, with terrifying ease, he placed the final lock on her life. He coldly dictated that guards would now shadow her every breath. The timeless life lesson here is deeply brutal. A heavy fortress built to keep the monsters out is fundamentally still a prison. Her freedom was completely gone. Let me set the scene for you guys, because this opening is absolute cinema. We start with Ara washed out in a cold, pale light, her shaky hands pushing back in a heartbreaking flash of defiance. But bro, look at Nikolai. His jaw is clenched so tight the bone might actually snap under his massive, toxic ego. He never once brings up her safety, only how her dying would absolutely wreck his mob legacy. When she cries about being his hostage, he completely flips the script. Melting into this wounded little boy act, he runs a heavy hand through his hair, whispering he cannot survive without her. It hits with a rough reality check. True love is supposed to make you feel safe, but unhealed trauma will literally train you to comfort the exact same person who locked you inside a cage. Defeated, she steps right back into the trap. Check out the lighting in this frame, because it is doing serious work. It is super dim, casting crazy bronze shadows over his face, while Ara stands there shaking, demanding real answers. Watch how this menace delays the whole thing. We hear the heavy clink of his crystal glass as he pours a stiff drink, trying to ground his own panic. He goes off about dismantling a massive underground ring run by Silas Crown 6 months ago, acting like some righteous god of violence. Ara realizes with pure horror that Nikolai let the guy live, and now Silas is clapping back just to make him feel totally helpless. It brings us to a harsh but true life lesson. For a guy who builds his entire personality around being the ultimate boss, there is absolutely no wound deeper or more fatal than having your control violently ripped away out of nowhere. The camera slowly creeps in on this insanely suffocating space between them. Ara straight up asks if he finally feels helpless, and bro, his face turns to solid ice. His jaw muscle twitches as he admits that. Watch how the frame shrinks the second this mob boss yanks her into his chest. He grabs her so tight, it looks like he might break her ribs, whispering he cannot even breathe without her. It is a masterclass in emotional extortion. Ara completely caves, crying into the chest of the guy creating her nightmare. She begs for a normal life, bargaining to finish their wedding once the mafia drama ends and he seals the lie with a kiss. But the exact second those oak doors open, the fake romance vanishes. His face turns to pure ice as he barks a brutal command to drag Silas back to him alive. Here is a massive reality check. When you anchor your future and peace to a violent soul, you are absolutely guaranteeing a life of total, relentless paranoia. Follow me right into the crazy tension of this next scene. Ara is basically sleepwalking through her own mansion like a ghost. You can hear heavy tactical boots stomping outside her bedroom, tracking her every move. Downstairs, the clueless staff is chatting about wedding orchids, but the place feels like a literal graveyard. Meanwhile, Nikolai has completely ghosted on sleep. Every morning, Ara wakes up freezing because he is glued to his glowing security monitors. By day 4, she is breaking down. She begs him to close his eyes, but he snaps back, swearing he will not rest until his rival is bleeding out. It is a super tragic lesson, guys. A golden cage is still a prison, no matter how rich the guy holding the key is, and shiny bars will never teach a bird how to fly. The camera locks onto her shaking hands as she drops the heaviest question ever. She asks him flat out how many bodies he has put in the ground. The silence is incredibly loud. Nikolai does not even blink. He casually drops the number 17 with zero regret in his voice. Any normal person would sprint out the front door, totally sickened by this absolute monster. But watch her body language. Here it is wild. Her shoulders drop, the terrifying truth hits her, and she actually breathes a sigh of relief. She is finding this twisted comfort in his massive body count. It highlights a devastating psychological truth. Trauma can warp your internal compass so badly that you start sprinting headfirst into a roaring fire, fully convinced the flames are just there to keep you warm. Focus on the way he tilts his head here. You can literally see the cold mafia calculation spinning in his eyes. Ara desperately looks for any shred of humanity, asking if he would drop his violent lifestyle for her. His answer is a total gut punch. He shuts her down, claiming his ruthless brutality is the only thing keeping her alive. He wraps his toxic control freak energy in fake romantic dialogue, offering zero apologies for dragging gang warfare to her front door. The real tragedy is her reaction. She just gives this soft, defeated sigh and tells him she loves the monster he is. It teaches us a super brutal lesson. When you willingly trash your own moral compass just to keep a toxic relationship alive, you end up losing your own soul long before you ever lose the guy. For one tiny second, the lighting gets soft. His scarred hands grab hers, acting like a heavy anchor trying to save a sinking ship. He whispers a sweet lie about backing off the security just to get her to stop crying. But before we can even enjoy the cute moment, his phone buzzes and shatters the vibe. There is an unmarked black sedan chilling outside their gates. Watch his posture snap. The soft fiancé is instantly gone, swapped out for an apex predator ready to throw down. Ara is absolutely panicking again, her heart hammering like crazy. This scene drops a massive reality check on us. You can never build a cozy, lasting life on a foundation of constant mob warfare, no matter how desperately you try to gaslight yourself into believing the romantic fantasy. Step right into the security room with me, guys. Up on the monitors, that sketchy black sedan is just sitting there, taunting them. Nikolai immediately sends his top enforcer, Victor, out to the gates. Notice the crazy staging here. Victor strolls out with his hands completely empty. It looks like he is surrendering, but it is actually the biggest flex of arrogant dominance ever. They exchange a few silent words through a cracked window and the car just dips out. When Ara asks what happened, Nikolai gives this deadpan smirk. He says his guys threatened to call the cops. The irony is a totally off the charts, a massive crime boss hiding behind the local police. It shows us a wild truth. In a world built entirely on dirty money, the line between hero and villain is just whatever is most convenient today. The camera stares at a ticking clock to hype up the anxiety. Nikolai knows that stunt at the gate was a test to map out his defense squad. Now they are trapped, waiting in this ultra-tense house. Then, right in the dead of night, Ara's phone aggressively vibrates. Her shaking hands light up the screen, and boom, it is a silent video. Someone filmed her walking through her own private library 5 whole days ago. All the color instantly drains from her face. Silas is straight up proving that Nikolai's massive security walls are a total joke because he's been watching her every move. This leaves us with a seriously creepy realization. The worst kind of violence is not always physical. Sometimes it is the terrifying theft of the one place where you genuinely thought you were safe from the monsters. A super creepy text pops up under the video, saying they have 3 days until the wedding. Nikolai glares at the screen and lets out this totally unhinged growl. The ultimate mafia boss just got outplayed. Ara immediately panics, realizing she leaked the date to her florist. She is basically suffocating on the guilt. But look at his master tier manipulation here. He does not yell. He pulls her in, gently wipes her tears, and completely forgives her. Boom, he just successfully trauma bonded her even tighter. Then, he instantly spins around, his brain already plotting a massively violent revenge strike. The sweet fiancée is gone, and only the loaded weapon is left. The lesson here is heavy. When you rely on a toxic person to erase your guilt, you end up permanently chained to their absolute darkest demons. The camera zooms out to show his absolute insane arrogance. Nikolai decides to use his own body as bait. This guy genuinely believes he can outsmart the Grim Reaper, the classic fatal flaw of every mob boss ever. Ara collapses to the floor crying, terrified she is about to watch him get clipped. He grabs her face, demanding blind loyalty, bragging about how immortal he is. Then he just strolls out, leaving her sobbing in the dark. The mansion instantly turns into a hardcore military base. You have guys racking heavy shotguns and strapping on tactical gear. By sunrise, the dream wedding is forcefully moved to a sketchy concrete bunker. It gives us a wild lesson on crazy pride. When a guy thinks he is completely untouchable, he will happily burn down his entire life just to flex that he can walk through the fire. Look at this, guys. We kick things off with Ara at a dining table so massive you could land a plane on it, but the vibe is completely dead. This is not a wedding setup. It is a straight-up military bunker. She zones out, pushing food around her plate like she is already a ghost. Homegirl looks at Nikolai with terrified eyes, asking if they built a safe house or a prison. And this dude? He just stares at his blueprints and mutters about a fortress, totally clueless that he is her jailer. The crazy part is she just nods and takes it, mistaking his toxic obsession for romance. It is wild to witness. Here is the real life lesson for today. Control wearing a mask of love is still just control, and real loyalty should always give you freedom, not a heavy set of iron chains. Nikolai drops a kiss on Ara's head, but it looks less like affection and more like a heavy weight pressing her down. He tells her to stay inside, his voice carrying the zero-chill energy of a warden locking a cell. To this boss, she is just a shiny trophy. Meanwhile, Mira acts totally delusional on the sidelines, trying to spin this massive red flag as some dark romance. She claims Nikolai is just scared, forcing Ara to play therapist for a literal monster. Ara accepts it, confusing heavily armed guards for a healthy bond. Mira is shaking, wondering if this twisted marriage can even survive the week. It brings up a huge reality check for all of us. Fear is only ever going to build massive brick walls around you, while actual love means having the guts to leave the front gate completely open. Mira hypes up Nikolai, saying he would turn the whole city into a parking lot just to get this wedding done. Fast forward 2 days, it is 4 a.m. Ara wakes up, reaching across cold sheets. She catches him standing under a single light bulb, gearing up in heavy tactical armor like he is dropping into a war zone. He casually mentions they bagged one of Silas's goons, sounding absolutely dead inside. He talks about breaking a guy's mind like he is reading a grocery list. And get this, Ara does not even run. She just asks what time he will be back, treating a brutal torture session like a minor schedule conflict. This is a heavy lesson, folks. Hanging around toxic darkness will eventually fry your moral compass. You have to protect your own empathy, or you will end up totally numb to the suffering of everyone else around you. Let's break this down together, because this is where it gets crazy. The boss grabs her face, immediately barking orders at the goons by the door. Marcus and Dimitri are not bodyguards. They are straight-up bouncers for her fancy prison cell. Ara actually begs him to stay safe, completely ignoring the massive trail of red flags he leaves behind. She is out here defending the exact same mobster who locked her up. Nikolai just waves off the violins like it is a regular Tuesday, thinking he can dodge his own karma. Then he pulls the ultimate psycho move. He pivots from planning a horrific interrogation to literally finalizing their wedding seating chart. Ara watches the sun come up over a city that has no idea she exists. Here is the takeaway. Never let your desperate need for a safe space trick you into making excuses for absolute monsters. Marcus tries to cool her down, hyping up their boss like he is some kind of invincible final boss. He keeps insisting Nikolai has everything under control, pushing the fake narrative that this dude cannot lose. Ara is pacing holes into the floor, her hands shaking like she is going through withdrawals. She is so insanely attached that being away from him destroys her. Her whole life is tied to a hitman. Fast forward to 2:30, and those massive doors finally creak open. Nikolai struts back in, but his knuckles are absolutely caked in fresh blood. Instead of hitting the panic button, Ara literally dives into his stained arms. He leans in and whispers that Silas is on his way. Listen up, because this is important. You will only find real peace when you stop confusing total chaos with passion. You must learn the difference between a bond that builds you up and a toxic trap that sets your entire world on fire. You hear the sink running as Nikolai furiously scrubs the red off his hands. He casually drops all the intel he tortured out of the guy, sounding completely empty inside. But the wildest part is Ara's reaction. When he confirms the hostage is getting wiped out, she does not even blink. Instead, this twisted look of satisfaction washes over her face. She has crossed into villain territory, soaking up his toxic mindset. Walking right into the steam, she straight up orders him to erase rival from the map. Nikolai freezes, and this massive, proud smirk spreads across his face because he realizes she is just as ruthless as he is now. This hits on a super scary truth. If you hang around toxic environments long enough, you eventually become the villain yourself. You have to make the hard choice to step away from bad situations before you totally forget how to be a good person. We are going to unpack this together because Ara's mindset is absolutely shattered right now. She locks her destiny to a mafia boss who thinks he runs the universe. They are prepping for a wedding inside a literal military compound. She shows up surrounded by heavy goons, staring at her fancy dress while looking out over a garden that is waiting for a turf war. She is rocking princess silk, but choking on the tension of a war zone. Mira is just hyping up the delusion. But then Marcus bursts in and completely wrecks the vibe. Hostiles are on the fence line. Silas decided to crash the party early. You can see the panic hit Ara as all the air leaves her lungs. The mafia reality just slammed right into her fake fairy tale. Here is the big lesson for today, guys. Pretending the red flags do not exist will never stop the brutal reality from eventually kicking down your front door. The whole compound instantly turns into bedlam. Marcus screams orders, trying to drag the bride down into the panic room, but get a load of her mental state. She flat out refuses to hide. Her obsession is so deep that she demands they finish the wedding right in the middle of a shootout. Over the comms, the boss announces they have exactly 15 minutes to tie the knot. Ara is shaking, gripping her bouquet for dear life. Ignoring every basic survival instinct, she floats through hallways packed with armed mobsters, stepping out onto a terrace. Nikolai is waiting at the altar, but he is not looking at a wife. He is staring at a shiny trophy he needs to lock down. She walks straight into the crossfire for him. Remember this always. Real loyalty is supposed to bring you total peace, not demand that you walk through a literal war zone to prove your worth. Stick with me, because this is where the crazy dials up to 10. There is no fancy wedding music, just the clicking of her heels on the pavement. A dirty, paid-off judge waits at the altar, proving how corrupt this empire really is. Ara zones out completely, focusing only on the furious flexing of Nikolai's jaw. He crushes her hand while Marcus yells they only have 3 minutes left. This is not a wedding vow. It is a frantic hostage deal. Nikolai snaps at the judge to speed it up, right as the east wall gets blown to pieces by heavy artillery. He slides the ring on her finger with icy calm. Bosses like him do not get scared. They just get insanely territorial. A massive explosion rips through the sky the exact second they are pronounced married. Here is the bottom line. You simply cannot build a stable, happy future when your entire foundation rests on constant drama and explosive violence. You guys have to see this madness. Smoke and shattered glass fly everywhere while Nikolai covers Ara. The terrified judge finally makes it official. In that exact second, the mob boss plants an aggressive kiss on her to claim his prize, while his right hand smoothly grabs a loaded pistol. It is the craziest mix of romance and straight-up slaughter. He shoves her back, and his eyes completely change. He is totally hyped for the violence. Marcus grabs the bride and physically drags her toward the bunker doors. Ara looks back, convinced her new husband is about to become a ghost in that smoke. They toss her into an underground panic room where screens show the massive turf war happening outside. The lesson here is brutal but true. If you buy your feeling of safety using toxic methods, you will spend the rest of your life hiding inside a heavy bunker just waiting for karma to finally catch up. The arsenal inside this bunker is insane. You could literally start a war with it. Mira is pale as a ghost, hiding behind a massive desk. Marcus screams to lock the vault, and those deadbolts slam shut with the terrifying thud of a coffin closing. We all want a safe space, but the way Ara is glued to those security feeds is pure, unhealthy obsession. The screens show Silas's hitman totally trashing her dream wedding. Ara is shrieking, demanding to know where her husband is. Marcus grabs his earpiece, trying to look cool, but his clenched jaw screams panic mode. He straight up lies, saying everything is handled. Meanwhile, Ara watches their own guards drop like flies on the monitors. Dust shakes off the ceiling from the blasts, and Marcus still coldly claims this is all part of the master plan. This is a crucial lesson. Delusion is often the brain's very last, desperate defense mechanism when the real world gets way too heavy to handle. One of the screens suddenly sparks and blacks out. Ara totally loses it, tearing her bridal bouquet to shreds and throwing the ruined roses at the metal walls. You are watching a mind literally snap under pressure. On the screens that still work, Nikolai glides through the chaos like the Grim Reaper himself. Pop, pop, 2 shots, 2 rival goons hit the pavement. To Ara, he is this twisted mix of hero and monster, showing just how brainwashed she really is. Marcus finally breaks, his voice shaking as he admits they walked straight into a trap. They prepped for a dozen guys, but 20 just breached the gates. Silas completely outplayed them. Ara turns dead pale, frozen in her ripped dress. It is a total bloodbath. Marcus screams an abort code over the comms, waiting in dead silence until Nikolai's raspy voice finally crackles through the radio. The life lesson? You can plan everything perfectly, but arrogant overconfidence will always lead you right into a devastating trap. Listen up. We need to unpack this absolute bloodbath. Nikolai is completely unhinged. He refuses to back down. So fixated on wiping out Silas that he ignores his own wedding venue, turning into a slaughterhouse. Ara is losing her mind, hitting Marcus, and begging the giant enforcer to save her husband. But Marcus is a brick wall, hardwired with one rule: keep Ara breathing. She chokes back sobs while the security feeds show the ultimate nightmare. Silas Crown is gliding through the ruined altar like the Grim Reaper, hunting down the boss. And honestly, it hits deep. We frequently let our massive egos demand these insane sacrifices, completely forgetting that the people who love us are always the ones left paying the brutal check in the wreckage. Exactly 15 minutes into this nightmare, the power grid drops dead. 3 agonizing seconds of pitch-black terror pass before the backup generators kick in, soaking the bunker in a bleeding red light. This safe room is now practically a concrete tomb. Ara paces a hole in the floor, her silk wedding dress dragging on the stone like a ghost trapped in purgatory. Dmitri checks the fried wiring and delivers the brutal news. They are totally blind to the bloodbath upstairs. Marcus aggressively twists the radio dial, finding nothing but cold static. She has been a mob wife for 20 minutes, but the trauma makes it feel like an eternity. Real talk, the heaviest cages we ever get trapped in are the ones we build ourselves out of toxic love and deep, unspoken fear. Ara frantically twists that cold platinum ring on her shaking finger. Notice that ring is basically a shiny handcuff she willingly put on. She is quietly sobbing, stuck in the tragic delusion that she can somehow tame a certified monster. Mira watches her with straight-up pity, whispering that a ruthless don like Nikolai will happily burn the world to ash to protect his property. Suddenly, the dead radio spits out a violent crackle, shattering the silence. Silas has officially breached the East Garden. You can hear massive footsteps thumping right above their heads, immediately followed by the terrifying roar of rifle fire. We waste so much energy building walls to keep the bad guys out, entirely forgetting that we have usually already locked the real danger inside the house with us. The massive iron bolts echo like thunder as Marcus locks down the bunker, his hand glued to his weapon. Ara is plastered against the freezing wall, absolutely vibrating with panic. A violent crash shakes the ceiling right over them, followed by pure, terrifying silence. She completely snaps and lunges for the door, desperate to run, but Marcus effortlessly pins her back. She screams, begging to know if her husband is even alive. Then the radio hisses and Victor drops the ultimate bombshell. Nikolai is down, the boss is bleeding out in the North Hall. Ara goes entirely numb, her whole reality collapsing into pure despair. It is wild how the human brain works. When we are genuinely terrified, we will desperately cling to the exact things destroying us, simply because that familiar pain has become our only home. The radio cracks, and Victor confirms 5 armed men are closing in fast. Marcus and Dmitri share an intense unspoken look that screams bad. Dmitri racks his rifle with terrifying efficiency. Ara loses it, dropping to her knees and grabbing Marcus by his coat, begging the hitman not to leave her alone in the dark. He just pulls away, shoves a massive pistol into her shaking hands, and orders her to blast the door until the shadows stop moving. Then they vanish. Our door slams shut, locking her in a literal tomb. Ara just stares at the cold gun, blind to the absolute bloodbath happening upstairs while Mira cries in the corner. Honestly, it is beyond tragic. The heaviest burdens we ever carry are usually the weapons forced onto us by the exact people who promised to protect us. Mira is rocking back and forth in the creepy red light, muttering that Nikolai has survived way worse. She is convinced his massive ego will not let him die, clinging to the kind of insane copium that keeps broken people functioning. Ara wants to believe her, but the math is not mathing. 20 trained killers are going up against a handful of guys. Silas flipped her dream wedding into a literal horror movie. Every single second feels like an eternity. The massive pistol in Ara's hand feels like an iron anchor dragging her down. She is shaking, tracing the trigger, terrified of what she might have to do. We always spin these comforting little fairy tales to shield our fragile minds, completely forgetting that brutal reality is always patiently waiting in the shadows to collect its absolute debt. Stick with me, because this is where the vibe flips. Ara asks how long they have been trapped. Mira whispers it has only been 8 minutes. It feels like a lifetime. Ara presses her freezing hands to her face, the wedding ring glinting in the red light. She realizes she chained her soul to a mob don whose lifestyle guaranteed this bloodbath. Suddenly, a metallic scrape echoes against the iron door. Someone is testing the locks. Ara stands up and all the panic vanishes. It is replaced by a scary, ice-cold focus. She tells Mira to hide and raises the gun, her hands totally rock solid. The scraping stops. The silence is deafening. She aims dead center at the door. Real power is never about feeling safe. It is about those terrifying moments where you are forced to stand your ground entirely alone. Then the radio cracks. Let us break down this crazy moment together. The deadbolts snap back, and then the door flies wide open. A massive wave of relief hits Ara, simply because she hears the boss's voice. Nikolai falls into the room, his expensive white shirt drenched in so much blood it looks like motor oil. The guy is bleeding heavily, but his jaw is completely locked. He absolutely refuses to show a single ounce of weakness. He is literally a broken king, refusing to drop his crown. Victor is right behind him, dumping a magazine down the hallway with a deafening roar. Ara does not even flinch. She tosses her weapon aside and sprints straight toward the bleeding Don. We always think pain makes us run away, but the twisted reality is that deep trauma completely hotwires our brains, making us walk directly back into the fire simply because the burning feels just like love. The gun clatters onto the cold floor. Ara drops her guard entirely, throwing her arms around the exact guy who dragged her into this mafia hellscape. Nikolai grabs her waist, yanking her against his shattered ribs. Do not get it twisted. This is not a sweet hug. This is a dying boss fiercely claiming his property. Marcus rips the ruined shirt off his shoulder, revealing a horrific wound. Mira instantly snaps into combat medic mode, dumping raw antiseptic right into the open flesh. Nikolai's body locks up like a board, but he refuses to make a sound. Screaming means showing the crew he is weak. Ara kneels in a puddle of his blood, begging to know where Silas is. Absolute loyalty is such a toxic drug. We will happily jump into someone else's violent hurricane, convinced that our own suffering is the only thing keeping them afloat. Silas is upstairs, systematically tearing the boss's empire apart like a machine. Marcus reads out the brutal stats. 7 hitters dead, 3 more bleeding out. They are stuck in a bunker, while this absolute demon owns the mansion above. Nikolai leans his head back, staring dead into Ara's eyes, and casually mentions that Silas only needs 15 minutes to turn them into ash. He is entirely testing her, wanting to see if the mob wife cracks. But Ara ice cold. She cups his bloody face, totally romanticizing this nightmare, believing that going down with the ship is the ultimate act of love. Then Victor steps up and completely ruins the tragic vibe with a hyper-practical escape plan. It is a major wake-up call. When your broken heart wants to embrace a toxic romance, it always takes the blunt logic of an outsider to snap you back into reality. Victor pitches a crazy suicide run through the utility tunnels. It is a massive risk, but Nikolai pulls the most manipulative boss move ever. He calmly offers to stay behind and bleed out to buy them time against Silas. He paints himself as the tragic martyr, permanently locking down his hero status in Ara's shattered head. Her reaction is pure devastation. Her white wedding dress is soaked in his blood, a perfect visual of how his violent lifestyle stained her forever. She screams, refusing to run, swearing she will never leave him behind. When he argues that his injuries will only slow the crew down, he knows exactly what game he is playing. It just tightens his leash on her soul. We mix up manipulation and sacrifice way too often. The sickest trick a toxic person can play is making you believe their suffering is solely to save your life. Step into the shadows of this bunker with me. The tension is so thick you could cut it with a knife. Ara stands dead still, choosing to get wiped out rather than cut her toxic ties to the boss. Her survival instincts are entirely erased by her obsession with this monster. Then the silence shatters. Mira pulls out an ancient burner phone. In the Mafia world, old tech means ancient debts paid in straight blood. She whispers that she just called in a literal ghost, a hitter named James Kovich. Watch Nikolai's face right here. His jaw tightens, showing a rare crack in his untouchable mob boss armor. Tama, 20 fresh guns are now swarming the mansion, about to completely flip this bloodbath on its head. It leaves you with a wild realization. Sometimes, the absolute darkest ghosts from your past are the only ones ruthless enough to save your fragile future. You and I have to unpack this absolute madness. Kovich rolls up like a ghost from that bloody disaster in Providence, and Nikolai is completely losing his mind over it. Mira tries, playing the fierce Marber bear, fighting to rip the bride out of this nightmare. But watch Nikolai right here. He corners Ara, pressing his forehead to hers. It looks romantic, right? Wrong. That is a straight-up leash. He whispers the bloodbath is escalating, and instead of running, she leans into the dark. He kisses her, tasting absolute carnage, and boom. His mafia boss swagger is instantly 100% restored. He immediately orders her extraction. The lesson here is wild, but totally true. Be extremely careful who you hand your heart over to, because love can easily turn into the most beautiful cage you ever lock yourself inside. The tiny bit of safety they had gets instantly shredded as heavy hits hammer the steel doors. Dmitri is absolutely panicking, clinging to the cold metal and shouting over the chaotic noise just to keep his sanity intact. The hitmen out in the hall do not care who catches a stray bullet tonight. Massive explosives violently rip through the corridor, killing the lights and choking the room with thick dust. Over the radio, Kovich speaks with this ice-cold calm, commanding his crew to survive this absolute slaughterhouse for 7 impossible minutes. Another blast tears the heavy door right off its hinges, exposing a straight-up nightmare of glowing muzzle flashes and screaming steel. Dmitri reports the breach, his voice completely hollow and dead. It teaches us a brutal lesson. When you sit in endless chaos for too long, the only way to endure the flames is to let a piece of your soul burn to ash. Nikolai is literally soaked in his own blood, yet this absolute madman drags his broken body totally upright. His massive ego absolutely refuses to let him die on his knees like a chump. He actually demands a chair, setting himself up like some dark mob king getting ready to slaughter his enemies. A dead silence drops over the room as everyone makes peace with their own graves. Suddenly, a massive explosion obliterates the doorway. 4 shadow assassins step smoothly through the thick smoke, and what happens next is a terrifying ballet of bullets. His hitmen drop their targets without a single wasted move, and Nikolai himself shoots the final intruder dead. The room reeks of foul gunsmoke and fresh blood. It proves a wild point about arrogance. A man driven by toxic pride will happily burn down the entire world, just to be the final guy sitting on top of the ashes. Get ready, because we are watching the exact second Ara officially loses her soul. Heavy footsteps echo down the hall, and she raises her gun without hesitating. That sweet, innocent girl is totally gone, swapped out for someone ready to catch a body to protect the mafia boss who broke her. But the shootout never happens. James Kovich steps into the light wearing full armor. He scans this absolute bloodbath with the bored eyes of a top-tier sociopath and casually announces the slaughter is over. Plot twist. Silas was never hunting them for some passionate mafia revenge. The dude was just caught upstairs, desperately trying to rob a financial vault like a common thief. Talk about a pathetic ending to a terrifying night. The lesson here hits hard. The scary monsters we compromise our morals for are usually just hollow, pathetic men chasing dirty money in the dark. The absolute second the gunfire stops, Ara completely crashes. Her adrenaline shatters and her knees slam into the cold floor. Marcus is literally begging Nikolai to get medical help for his fatal-looking wounds. But a proud narcissist wants the win way more than oxygen. Nikolai straight up refuses. He drags his bleeding body forward, obsessed with looking his defeated rival right in the eyes. Ara just silently follows him. Her deep trauma is tragically supergluing her to his side, making her a front-row witness to his dark villain era. They drift through the totally trashed estate like wandering ghosts. That pristine white wedding aisle is now buried under shattered chairs and huge pools of blood, with Silas tied up at the end of it. It brings up a super heartbreaking truth. We can never truly fix our deepest emotional trauma if we refuse to walk away from the exact toxic places that broke us. Pay attention to Silas sitting in that dim light, guys. He is not giving off cool movie villain vibes at all. He is literally just an average, balding dude in a ripped suit who looks like your tired accountant. But the real horror is in his eyes. They are totally empty voids, completely scrubbed of all human empathy. It proves a seriously terrifying point. Real monsters rarely have fangs. They usually just look like ordinary people hiding empty hearts. Silas actually laughs, giving a super sarcastic toast to the ruined wedding. Nikolai stands rigid like a wounded alpha predator, holding his violent ground. He coldly orders his guards out. Ara is literally begging him to stop, but he forces her to stay. He wants her to watch his psyche snap, disguising this absolute horror as deep intimacy to trap her in his world. The heavy doors click shut, and it is about to get so much worse. The heavy doors seal them inside this suffocating psychological pressure cooker. Nikolai stalks toward the tied-up guy, and even though every step leaves a bloody footprint, he radiates this terrifying, raw violence. His voice drops to a low hum as he clinically lists off every single one of Silas's massive failures. Silas totally deflects, desperate to protect his fragile ego, spitting that Nikolai ruined his human trafficking ring and stole his entire criminal empire. Nikolai just glares back, absolutely disgusted by by the horror of selling human lives. Silas shrugs against his zip ties. He gives the sickening smile, claiming every man is the hero of his own story. It brings up a chilling reflection on human nature. We constantly invent convenient lies to justify the terrible damage we leave behind. Then, Silas turns his dead eyes toward Ara, getting ready to rip her fragile mind to shreds. Silas goes straight for the cracks in Ara's mind, taunting her about all the corpses her beloved husband stepped on to build his mafia throne. Ara totally holds his gaze, insisting she knows enough. Silas laughs, eagerly dropping names of the families Nikolai completely destroyed. Nikolai cannot handle this reality. Check. His twisted ego desperately needs to remain her righteous savior. He steps in, aggressively claiming those guys totally deserve to bleed out. Silas smirks and straight up calls him a false god. Boom. In a blur, Nikolai's hand clamps violently around Silas's throat. While the guy chokes, Nikolai whispers the ultimate plot twist. Federal agents are literally dismantling his empire right now. He drops him, letting him gasp. Death is too easy. Total public ruin is his real revenge. It teaches us a grim truth. Revenge never heals our deep pain. It just pours our agony into a much darker cup. The dust is finally settling down. Silas spits blood on the floor, heavily mocking Nikolai for going soft. Nikolai stares at Ara, trying to claim his love, has totally cured his dark hunger for vengeance. But do not fall for that toxic garbage. He has just moved his suffocating need for control directly onto his bride. Silas sneers, warning that Ara will run for the hills once she realizes she married a literal monster. Stick with me on this one, guys, because the twist is insane. She does not run at all. Instead, she crouches down, and her voice is terrifyingly calm as she casually lists Nikolai's 17 murders like she is reading romantic poetry. She genuinely believes his violent sociopathy is a protective shield made just for her. It reveals a super profound tragedy. We are often so desperate for affection that we will gladly rename pure poison as medicine just so we can swallow it down. Ara drops this absolutely chilling judgment, drawing the craziest moral line between Silas stealing lives and her husband literally butchering his mafia rivals. She actually weaponizes her own traumatic past, using her survival of a super abusive LSX as twisted proof that she is strong now. Her mind is completely trapped in a dark loop, guys. She did not escape the cycle of abuse at all. She just traded up for a mobster with way sharper teeth. Silas stares at her, totally freaked out by the psychological rot in her brain. Meanwhile, Nikolai is looking at her with this sick, twisted pride, finally realizing he has completely infected her mind. She casually suggests they find a doctor, acting like this absolute bloodbath is a minor flat tire. They vanish into a secret clinic. It drops a painful truth. Broken bones can heal in a few weeks, but when a human mind shatters this deeply, the darkness is permanent. You and I have definitely seen how massive trauma changes characters, but this visual is next level insane. Ara sits in a sterile clinic waiting room, still fully wearing her trashed wedding dress. The gorgeous white silk is absolutely drenched in crimson blood. She stares blankly at the wall with this haunting stillness, completely ignoring the terrified whispers of the passing nurses. The insane violence of her new mob wife lifestyle is literally painted all over her body. When the surgeon confirms Nikolai survived the shootout, a massive wave of dark relief drops her straight to her knees. Her dark mafia god is still alive. She pushes into his room, finding him completely wrecked, but his dark eyes instantly lock onto hers with this crazy burning intensity. It reminds us of a chilling fact. No matter the trap, A true predator will always endure the absolute worst pain just to survive another bloody day. Just watch the camera totally linger on Ara here. It is capturing a massive, permanent psychological shift. Nikolai is standing across from her, completely beaten to a pulp, but totally lucid. His dark eyes are desperately scanning her face, looking for the sweet innocence he just destroyed. He straight up asks if she is going to stay, now that she has seen the absolute monster he truly is. Ara does not even blink. She flat out admits she watched him drop bodies. Yet she pulls that violent energy closer, totally claiming this cold-blooded killer as her own. We have to face a harsh truth about psychology. Our minds will gladly justify the absolute worst depravity if we convince ourselves that the darkness keeps us safe. Nikolai quietly whispers that she actually terrifies him now. That tiny shake in his voice is the most honest he has ever been. The victim did not just survive the beast. She leveled up and proudly became his equal. Guys, look at this absolute madness. Nikolai is standing over his new bride, her gorgeous silk dress literally dripping with fresh blood. And this dude has the audacity to claim he is sparing his enemy Silas because he wants to be better. Bro is playing next level psychological chess, painting himself as the hero just to keep Ara hooked. And Ara? She immediately feeds right into his insane delusion. You are already better, she cries, completely brainwashed into thinking her kidnapper is her knight in shining armor. He just smirks like the predator he is, reminding her they literally got married in a war zone. It just goes to show you a brutal life lesson. Sometimes we are so desperate to survive that we fall in love with the monster holding the cage keys to our own prison. Now check this out. Nikolai is waving their marriage certificate around like it is a loaded weapon, proving they were a thing before the bullets even started flying. Ara praying his judgment. But you can hear her voice shaking because she is drowning in absolute denial. Right there under the harsh hospital lights, Nikolai promises her the ultimate fairy tale. A normal life, a peaceful honeymoon, zero gunfire. He is selling peace, but a mafia boss can never actually deliver that. Ara kisses his forehead, signing her soul away to a future that is completely impossible. Here is a solid life lesson for you. Clinging to a fake fantasy just to survive today will only set you up for a massive crash. And boom, go, Marcus bursts through the hospital doors, completely shattering the dream. The temperature in this room instantly drops to absolute zero. The second Marcus mentions the feds, that whole sweet domestic husband act vanishes into thin air. Marcus drops the bomb. Silas got his intel from a rat inside their own crew. For a mafia kingpin like Nikolai, this is not just a business glitch. It is a direct slap to his ego and absolute authority. His chest is literally stitched together, and Ara is begging him to chill. But he forces himself out of that hospital bed like an absolute Terminator. His voice goes completely dead. He demands the traitor's name right now. No more Mr. Nice Guy. It teaches us a grim life lesson. People obsessed with total control will happily burn their entire world down just to keep their crown. Nothing matters more than pure power to them. This guy's reaction is next level unhinged. Pure toxic mafia rage is literally overriding his human pain limits. It is 3 in the morning and Nikolai is ripping himself out of the hospital, totally ignoring his torn surgical stitches. When the nurses try to stop him, his muscle steps up and quietly threatens them into pure silence. Ara is watching this from the corner, and you can see her reality cracking. She knows exactly what her mob boss buzzed to traitors, yet she just grips his freezing hand and walks out into the pitch black night with him. He refuses all painkillers in the car like an absolute psycho. Here is a tough life lesson. A broken person will follow a toxic leader straight off a cliff if they do not value themselves enough to break the vicious cycle. Stick with me here, guys, because this car ride is straight out of a horror movie. Nikolai is hiding his insane physical agony behind a clenched jaw, completely bathed in creepy streetlights. When Ara softly begs him to take it easy, he just flat out states the traitor is getting executed. Boom, no hesitation, totally empty eyes. Major sociopath vibes. And Ara? Not a single peep of objection. Her entire moral compass is completely broken and rebuilt to serve him. Next thing you know, they roll into this painfully bright, sterile conference room, and 2 federal agents are sitting there waiting. This is insane. It is a huge life lesson right here. Even the biggest, baddest justice systems will bend the rules when they are desperate to negotiate with a truly untouchable predator. The body language in this room is screaming red flags. Agent Reeves tries to step up for a handshake, and Nikolai just brutally blanks her. It is an ice-cold flex of pure mafia dominance. He just demands the names with zero emotion. The agent slides a printed transcript across the table, and when Ara reads it, you can practically see her soul leave her body. The paper lists her exact daily schedule, her morning coffee, her Tuesday library, trips, everything. Having your entire life tracked like a literal assassination target is next-level trauma. It completely ruins the basic illusion of safety we all need. Remember this life lesson. Privacy is an illusion, and the walls built to protect you can turn into a glass cage overnight when the wrong people are watching your every move. Let us talk about extreme, unhinged attachment. Nikolai would straight up nuke his entire underworld empire before letting anyone touch Ara. The agents show the texts, and Ara starts hyperventilating, having a full-blown panic attack. Then they drop the ultimate plot twist, a security photo of their sweet, trusted housekeeper, Mira, buying a burner phone. Ara instantly goes into massive denial mode. Honestly, it is a relatable life lesson. As humans, we constantly blind ourselves to the glaring red flags right in our faces because the truth is just too painful to swallow. But Nikolai? His reaction is terrifying. Every emotion gets wiped from his face. He turns into a literal statue and coldly orders his goons to lock Mira down. He shifts into pure, unstoppable boss mode in a flash. Listen to this insane twist, guys. While Marcus runs off to bag the traitor, Nikolai is laser scanning that photo, desperate to prove it is a fake. A paranoid kingpin like him never trusts the feds. But then the agents drop the absolute hammer. Bank records, huge wire transfers from Silas straight to Mira, and her secret account under her maiden name. Ara is completely glitching out, remembering how Mira used to cry about her dead husband. Well, guess what? He is not dead. Her husband is serving a life sentence because Nikolai put him away 15 years ago. Talk about a long con vendetta. It drops a heavy life lesson. If your entire foundation is built on lies and dark secrets, the eventual collapse is going to crush absolutely everyone around you. The silence is deafening. You can practically taste the tension in this scene. Nikolai slaps the photo face down, violently trying to hide his massive internal freak-out. The horrifying reality just clicked for him. Mira infiltrated his heavily guarded life months after he ruined hers. For 15 years, this mob boss thought he was completely untouchable, blindly trusting this woman with his security and his literal wife. Ara touches his hand, and he is freezing cold. The dude is in absolute physical shock. Here is a crucial life lesson for you. Our biggest vulnerabilities are usually hiding in the exact people we refuse to double-check. Agent Reeves violently twists the knife, threatening Mira with 20 years behind bars. It is a ruthless chess move, weaponizing his wrecked ego to force a confession. The feds throw out a cold deal. 10 years instead of 20 if Mira snitches. Nikolai violently snaps out of his chair, completely ignoring his ripping shoulder muscles. His version of mafia justice is way too dark for their pathetic legal rules. Reeves stares him down, bringing up his insane history of bloodshed. It delivers a tough life lesson we all need to hear. True justice means actual accountability. Even when going for bloody vengeance feels way more satisfying in the heat of the moment. She warns him that this little chat is the only reason Mira is still breathing. Nikolai just storms out. Ara immediately trails behind him, completely trapped by her brainwashing. In that silent, terrifying elevator ride, she realizes she is standing next to beat about to slaughter its prey. We have all seen this kind of crazy tension, but you and I know this is about to get brutal. Picture this windowless, creepy interrogation room. Nikolai is standing there like an absolute ice sculpture, and his silence is so heavy it could shatter the concrete floor. Mira is completely shrinking into her cheap metal chair. But here is the wildest psychological twist. Mira actually looks relieved. She is looking for comfort from the exact mafia boss she just sold out. It highlights a deeply tragic life lesson. Pure desperation makes us seek shelter in the very fires we started ourselves. Nikolai absolutely obliterates her fake comfort zone, barking an explosive command to shut up. He slams the evidence down onto the steel table, his voice dead as he lists off every single leaked secret. Mira goes completely pale, looking like an actual ghost. The camera zooms in on Nikolai as his massive, terrifying aura suffocates the entire room, keeping his voice in this bone-chilling, flat monotone. He exposes all her secret smuggler money trails. He crouched down, locking onto her soul like an apex predator, demanding to know why she tried to put a hit on his wife. Under that insane mafia pressure, she completely shatters. Bawling her eyes out, Mira drops the ultimate plot twist. Silas Crown kidnapped her daughter. Boom. Everything changes in 1 second. It leaves us with a painful life lesson. The worst part about a massive betrayal is how it completely wrecks your confidence, forcing you to question every single thing you thought was real in your entire life. Yo, guys, watch this absolute meltdown. Mira is straight up breaking down in tears, spilling the wildest plot twist ever. This rival boss, Silas, snatched up her 23-year-old daughter, Katya, a whole month ago. No ransom, no money. He just used a mother's love to steal the syndicate's security codes. Dirty play, right? Nikolai is just standing there like a literal ice statue. Not a single blink. He drops the coldest reality check. If she snitched earlier, they would be in a mafia war. But Katya was a goner either way. She totally sold out the mob family for her real family. Look, the simple life lesson here is this. When the people you love are on the line, every rule and oath gets thrown out the window. Mira is literally choking on guilt right now, guys. She loves Nikolai. She watched this man bleed to build his criminal empire. Ara is in the back tearing up because a mother's choice is just brutal. But Nikolai? Zero chill. His eyes are pitch black. Dude has no pity and demands to know where the girl is. Mira drops another bomb. Silas was planning to ice her first and then deal with Katya after the big wedding. Nikolai's brain goes into overdrive. Boom, he orders Victor to call up Agent Reeves for a massive, full-scale raid. It is time to wipe the floor with these guys. And honestly, the life lesson is pretty obvious. When you are backed into a corner, crying gets you nowhere, but taking massive, fast action might just save your life. Let us look at this scene together. The lighting is super dark, perfectly matching the ruined vibes. Nikolai is not letting her off the hook. He hits her with the hardest guilt trip, reminding her that 7 of his top goons are in boxes right now solely because of her backstabbing. Mira keeps crying, but sorry, tears do not revive the squad. Nikolai is totally disgusted and tells the guards to toss her out. But wait, Ara steps up and blocks him. She forces him to see the real villain here. Silas is a complete psycho who will totally cancel Katya once she is useless. Ara is stuck between the Mafia Don she is falling for and her mentor. Life lesson check. Loyalty is amazing, but it is super fragile and shatters instantly when pure survival kicks in. Mira is literally shaking, begging Ara for a lifeline. Ara goes full sprint after Nikolai, grabbing his arm right in the hallway. Bold move. She is pleading for some mercy, screaming that 15 years of loyalty has to count for something. Any mom would torch the entire city for her. Kid, Nikolai is clenching his jaw, fighting his own demons, completely refusing to accept her betrayal. But Ara pushes harder. She flips the script, pointing the finger at Silas for weaponizing a mother's love. Nikolai's icy glare finally starts melting. He agrees to go after the girl, but on his own totally unhinged terms. Here is a solid life lesson for you. Understanding why someone betrayed you does not mean you have to forgive them, but it helps you move on. So Nikolai goes completely alpha, setting up crazy, strict rules to keep his sanity. He straight up bans any negotiation with Silas. This is a boss flexing his power after getting stabbed in the back. He wants Mira punished and is 0% ready to forgive her. But then Ara just looks at him, quietly asking him to be the hero and save a helpless girl. She is totally anchoring his dark soul right now. And guys, the life lesson is real. A quiet, gentle request can completely overpower toxic any day of the week. Still, Nikolai needs to hit something, so he orders his hacker Marcus to track Silas down. In like 5 seconds flat, the luxury penthouse turns into a sweaty, highly armed war room, and the hype is off the charts. Stick with me here, because this detective work gets super dark. Ara is glowing from the screen light, hunting through Katya's digital footprint. The pics show a super sweet, innocent girl right before she got snatched up 6 weeks ago. The switch from normal life to Mafia Nightmare is rough. Ara finds a frantic post from Katya's friend, Sarah Chen. Now Ara is sweating because she is running with killers and has to cold call a normal civilian. Sarah answers, totally freaked out and defensive. Ara is stumbling, trying to hide her real mob ties while getting the scoop. It brings up a harsh life lesson we all face when we are hiding our own dark secrets. It makes it incredibly difficult to ask for help when we actually need it the most. The camera zooms in on Ara as she expertly plays good cop, getting Sarah to spill about the days before Katya was taken. Sarah is shaking and talking about how Katya was completely losing her mind over a creepy shadow sitting in a dark ride outside her window. When Katya went missing, the cops totally dropped the ball. They called her a runaway and completely ignored the massive red flags. Bruh, Katya had 0 reason to just vanish. Ara is gripping the phone, her heart going crazy as she pieces this horror movie together. Here is a simple life lesson. Always trust your gut feeling because the world loves to ignore quiet warnings. Ara practically begs her to send over any blurry pics or hidden clues she might have saved before things went south. Literally 2 minutes later, ding, a text lights up the room. Ara checks it and her jaw drops. Katya managed to snap a blurry photo of the stalker's car, catching a partial license plate. 7RTK-49. Huge win for Katya. Ara throws the phone to Marcus. The dude goes full hacker mode, fingers flying. The car is buried under fake companies, but dirty money always leaves a trail. Boom. The address points straight to a warehouse owned by the big bad himself. Silas. This shows a profound life lesson. Arrogance always leaves a footprint, no matter how much of a genius the villain thinks he is. Nikolai stands up, staring at the map. His eyes go cold. The boss just locked onto his target, and you know absolute destruction is coming next. The South Boston warehouse looks like a straight-up horror movie set. Nikolai grabs his trench coat, completely ignoring the massive pain in his busted shoulder. What an absolute tank. He signals Kovich, waking up the mob's heavy hitters. Nikolai tries to bench Ara, telling her to stay behind, but she is not having it. She locks eyes with him, refusing to sit on the sidelines while a girl's life is on the line. Shockingly, the ruthless Kovich actually backs her up. He points out that a normal person might catch a clue that mob soldiers would miss. There is a solid life lesson here. Sometimes an outside perspective is the only way to see the actual truth. Nikolai finally agrees, and the hit squad rolls out into the heavy, creepy morning fog. Walk with me through this absolute nightmare zone. This yard is totally packed with rusted metal and razor wire shining in the moonlight. Kovich and his hitmen slice through the defenses like literal ninjas. Nikolai kicks the doors in, running purely on hype and adrenaline to mask his shoulder pain. The warehouse is a giant maze of creepy shadows and dust. Suddenly they spot it, a nasty welded cage dumped on the freezing floor, and there is Katya, shaking in the dirt, wearing heavy chains like a prisoner. The twist hits super hard because she has the exact same terrified eyes as her traitor mom. It gives us a chilling life lesson. No matter how fast you run, you can never truly escape the messy drama and ghosts of your family's past. When they finally reach Katya, it is rough. The lighting is terrible, and she looks totally wrecked, bruised, weak, and fully panicking. Nikolai actually drops his scary boss persona for a second. He crouches in the dirt, keeping his voice super calm while he snaps those heavy chains. Ara drops right beside him, hugging the shivering girl tight. Ara learned how to survive around monsters, and now she is passing that strength on. They try to sneak Katya toward the steel exit door, but out of nowhere, bam, automatic gunfire absolutely shreds the silence. Total ambush. The lesson here is brutal but simple. The moment you finally relax and think you are safe, the universe tests you. The real boss fight was just starting in that suffocating basement. You and I are about to see absolute chaos unfold. Marcus screams over the radio, confirming Silas just trapped them with 10 heavily armed goons. Nikolai freezes, completely shutting off his emotions to go into pure survival mode. He yells at Ara to grab Katya and escape through a rusted floor hatch. But Ara is totally stuck. She refuses to leave her Mafia King behind because her attachment is just that crazy. It takes a bullet, barely missing Nikolai's head for him to finally scream at her to move. Ara drags the crying girl through the crates while bullets fly everywhere. She hits a locked door and starts beating it with her bare fists. Listen to this life lesson. When things get truly desperate, logic dies and pure human willpower takes over. You and I are jumping right into the chaos of this dark alleyway. 3 heavy strikes later, the metal lock snaps, dumping them into a passage that reeks of hot garbage. They barely walk 10 feet before a hitman steps out of the shadows. He actually smiles, raising his weapon and whispering that it is nothing personal. The gunshot goes off like thunder. But plot twist, it is the smiling assassin who eats the concrete. Victor steps into the yellow glow of the street lamp, his rifle smoking, and screams at them to run as sirens wail in the distance. They sprint into the city maze. Life teaches us a pretty brutal truth in moments like these. Sometimes surviving means you just have to keep moving forward, no matter how terrifying it gets, without ever looking back. Another sharp crack splits the night, and Victor drops to the pavement. Blood, instantly, soaks his leg from a massive wound. He is literally bleeding out, but he grits his teeth and screams at Ara to leave him behind. He tells her to save the girl instead. This is the exact moment her mind breaks. Ara makes the agonizing choice to let go of his hand, absorbing a huge amount of survivor guilt. She drags Katya to the road just as federal agents swarm the block. A cop freezes, staring at Ara in a shredded, blood-soaked wedding dress, and frantically yells for backup. Complete silence falls as the warehouse is finally breached. It just goes to show that the hardest choices we make do not simply save us. They end up haunting our quietest moments for the rest of our lives. When Nikolai steps out of the shadows, dripping in blood and leaning heavily on Marcus, Alara does not even try to run. Instead, she sprints right at this predator and fiercely grabs his face. She whispers that they got lucky, but Nikolai completely rejects that. He claims they survived purely because of his own unstoppable will. They share a harsh, desperate kiss that tastes like copper and smoke. Agent Reeves steps into the flashing police lights, confirming that Silas is finished and the girl is safe. Even with Mira facing heavy charges, Nikolai is still a total control freak. He flatly orders the agent to bring the mother and child together. Reeves hesitates, staring into his cold, dead eyes. Life shows us we often mistake control for destiny, completely forgetting that even the hardest iron will eventually snap under enough pressure. Reeves gives a reluctant nod and walks away. Nikolai mutters that he just wants to go home, his capacity for violence finally running on empty. Alara tells him to rest. Stepping up to play caretaker for this broken king, they head back to a penthouse that feels terrifyingly empty. Mira is sitting in a federal cell, her 15 years of loyalty completely erased. Alara brews espresso, but it tastes like the harsh bitterness of their ruined reality. Nikolai sits frozen at the table, staring into the dark city skyline like an absolute ghost. Alara tries to soften the trauma, reminding him that Mira saved Katya and that they survived. Nikolai does not even blink. He talks about her devotion with a chilling emptiness. You can survive the absolute worst fires, but you can never quite wash that dark scent of smoke out of your own home. Nikolai stares at his hands, convinced the blood spilled at their wedding was his own massive failure. Alara moves closer, gently reframing the betrayal as the desperate panic of a mother pushed to the edge. Forcing the boss to look at her, her intense bond shines through the dark. She flips the script, painting the nightmare of the gunfire as a twisted romantic tragedy. She actually calls his brutal violence the ultimate proof of his love. Under the crushing weight of that blind devotion, the iron walls of this predator finally snap. Nikolai buries his face in his hands and weeps. He confesses his love and she holds him tight. As the sun creeps up, the monster and his captive sit together in the wreckage. In the end, we all secretly crave a witness who looks at our absolute darkest sins and still decides to stay. Stick with me, because you and I need to unpack the psychology of how these two survive. The massive betrayal only cemented their toxic codependency. While Silas sits rotting in a concrete box, mourning his ruined empire, Nikolai and Alara slowly rebuild their dark world. The trial drags on for 3 grueling weeks. Alara sits in the gallery every single day, watching prosecutors dismantle Silas using hard evidence and Mira's hollow testimony. Silas sits heavily shackled, his face a totally blank mask. He never looks at Alara, yet she feels his predatory gaze hitting her like static electricity in that cold courtroom. Nikolai wisely stays far away, fully knowing his own violent urges. True prisons are not just made of iron bars, but of the terrifying memories we cannot escape when we close our eyes at night. Nikolai's battered body forces him to rely on strong painkillers, a harsh reality that crushes his ego. Staying away from the courtroom is his only survival tactic. He knows that the second he sees Silas, he will try to end him. So Alara goes in his place. On the 14th day, Mira finally takes the stand. The physical change in this woman is devastating. The proud manager who used to run Nikolai's life is entirely gone. Her hair is pure white, and her fragile hands shake against the polished wood. The prosecution softly explains how Silas ruthlessly exploited her love for her kid. But when the defense attorney stands up, all that mercy vanishes. He goes straight for the throat, brutally attacking her terrible choices. Time does not age us half as fast as the heavy, crushing burden of trying to keep our loved ones breathing. The defense attorney paces the floor, loudly accusing Mira of plotting revenge against Nikolai. Mira shakes her tired head, explaining her twisted affection for the boss. She openly admits she truly cared for him, ignoring their toxic power dynamic. But when the lawyer pushes her relentlessly on the betrayal, her walls crumble. With tears spilling down her face, she confesses she would help a monster 1,000 times over if it meant her daughter lived. The lawyer cruelly mocks her morals. Mira stares right through him, asking if he would not do the exact same thing for his own blood. Stepping down, she looks desperately at Alara for a single ounce of grace. Alara slowly, coldly, turns her head away. The trauma is simply too loud. Forgiveness is a broken bridge we cannot cross while the river of pain is still flooding. The judge finally drops the hammer. Silas is labeled an apex predator and locked in a cage for life. Mira gets hit with 10 years, the court glossing over the intense coercion that broke her. Out in the freezing white hallway, Katya absolutely loses it. Her weeping is the raw release of a kid who has been hunted by the mob for weeks. She mourns her mother's cage while crying for her own survival. Alara finds this hollowed-out girl leaning against the cold marble. Katya is deeply bitter, furious that she was used as a disposable pawn in a war of monsters. Alara steps close, her voice incredibly soft. She tells Katya that her mother's choices were not a failure of logic, but a primal sacrifice. A mother's love is a terrifying force that will gladly burn down the entire world just to keep her child warm. You and I have to look at this final fallout together because it hits hard. Katya's voice is sharp with bitterness, torn by the fact that her mother ruined innocent lives to keep her breathing. Alara stands quietly, hearing the exact same arguments she fights in her own head every night. Katya wipes her eyes, whispering she is leaving for Providence to find a clean purpose away from this mafia chaos. She offers a fragile thank you, shocked that a violent man like Nikolai had the mercy to let her walk. Then, she turns and vanishes into the sea of feds outside the glass doors. Alara watches her go, feeling the crushing gravity of the violence they barely survived. Mira chose her child, and the terrible dominoes fell in blood. Every choice we make casts a long shadow, and sometimes all we can really do is learn to walk bravely through the dark. You and I watch the camera pan across the dimly lit penthouse. The scent of roasting meat and crushed garlic fills the air, a jarring contrast to the damage they leave behind. Elara stands in the doorway, watching Nikolai. The boss is physically broken, yet he cooks with quiet dominance. She whispers the heavy verdict. Life without parole, and Katya carrying guilt that was never hers. Nikolai does not flinch. He simply stirs the pan, speaking in a low rumble about a future wedding free of gunfire. It is a tragic, beautiful dream. The corner of Elara's mouth betrays her, pulling into a faint smile. This reminds us of a profound truth. Even in the darkest ruins, the human heart reaches for the smallest glimmer of hope. We just must ensure that hope is not another lie keeping us trapped. Bro, look at this scene with me right now. You and I have seen how trauma glues people together, making toxic chains look exactly like romance. The camera lingers as she traces that wicked scar on his shoulder. They sit under this cozy, totally fake lighting, dropping casual small talk. But those boring words are floating over a massive ocean of unspoken violence. It is honestly a heartbreaking performance. Here is a simple life lesson for you. Sometimes the most desperate lie we can ever tell is pretending our lives are completely normal. The second those dinner plates are cleared away, that fragile illusion shatters. Nikolai moves like an absolute ghost, sliding a sealed envelope right across that cold marble counter. The camera slowly pushes in as Elara cracks that seal. Inside are straight-up property transfer documents for a building on Newbury Street, located right next to her old library. Her breath hitches, and you can see the sheer shock washing over her pale face. Nikolai just bought the exact space for her rare bookshop. It is a desperate flex by a dangerous mob enforcer to build a fragile glass sanctuary for his girl. He insists she needs a future far away from his criminal syndicate shadows. She does not need his money, he murmurs, but she absolutely deserves it. He wants her to have her own identity. Here is a simple life lesson. True devotion is never demanded by force. We actually secure it when we give someone the exact life they always dreamed of, silently binding them to us forever. She completely studied this as this brutal mafia hitman, the exact guy who caught her during every single emotional free fall. He desperately needs her happiness to anchor his own fractured soul. Boom. The scene jumps forward 3 months. We step into the warm, controlled air of the new bookshop, where soft lighting protects those fragile texts. Opening day brings a massive crowd, and standing right behind the brass cash register is Nikolai himself. The visual clash here is absolutely wild. This is a lethal predator, covered in heavy combat scars, just chilling among nervous poetry nerds. It teaches us a simple life lesson about sacrifice. We will willingly endure the most awkward, uncomfortable situations imaginable, just to watch the person we truly love finally step into the light and shine. The camera tracks Nikolai right behind the counter. His eyes still hold that cold, terrifying gaze of a man intimate with street violence, yet he adapts like a pro. He leans over, patiently guiding a kid toward a fantasy novel. Across the room, Elara watches him, and the heavy tension finally drops from her shoulders. Their crazy opposite worlds are actually blending together. By midday, Marcus rolls in with hot food. Now running the security empire, his big brain is valued over tactical bloodshed. He checks out the half-empty shelves, totally hyped by the sales numbers. This quiet little hour teaches us a vital life lesson. Real peace is never found by just running away from the dark. True peace is found by building a safe sanctuary where our most broken pieces can finally rest. Marcus drops Nikolai's financial numbers, but Elara narrows her eyes. She tells him to go manage his illicit crime syndicate while she handles her own business. It is such a boss move. Stick with me here, because this is where the picture sharpens. Nikolai watches the room with the exact same lethal focus he uses in a street fight. When a dealer shows up, Alara handles the negotiation with pure ruthless energy. They have mirrored each other completely. At closing time, Alara leans against the shelves, exhausted but glowing. She whispers her gratitude, and he softly replies that he only gave her the room to win. Here is a simple life lesson. True support never forces you to change who you are. It just provides the safe soil where you can plant your own roots. The shop goes completely silent, filled with that classic old paper smell. The camera pushes in as Alara looks up. She wants to fast-track this wedding right now. After dealing with endless mafia violence, her tired soul needs the absolute permanence of this bond. Nikolai frowns, stressing over the security logistics. But she shuts it down, rejecting the fortified bunkers and armed guards. She wants the ceremony right here in her quiet triumph. Boom, the scene dissolves to a beautiful Sunday afternoon in August. 30 guests gather as golden sunlight floods the room. It is a crazy, deceptive end to a tragic survival story, and it reminds us of a simple life lesson. To build a beautiful future, we must sometimes lay the new foundation right on top of the ashes of our most painful memories. Alara steps into that golden light, ditching the flashy mafia vibes for a simple dress. Nikolai is waiting. His tailored suit hides the brutal wreckage of his old injuries, but his stiff posture totally gives away his hidden pain. Marcus stands right between them, acting as the officiant. He describes their bond as a grueling, daily choice to hold on to each other in a violently hostile world. Then Nikolai speaks. His vows are a straight-up devastating confession of his dark past. He admits his terrifying capacity for violence, praising her for never asking him to fake being a nice guy. It is a heavy surrender. Here is a simple life lesson. Real love is not about finding flawless perfection. It is about finding someone who sees your dangerous edges and refuses to look away. Let us look really closely at this frame together, you and I. The camera holds perfectly steady on Nikolai's face. His voice is rough with raw emotion as he promises to be her shield against the outside world. But watch the dark shadows in his eyes, guys. He masterfully spins his terrifying control over her life into a narrative of romantic devotion. Alara blinks back tears, clutching his hands. She whispers that when she was starving and broken, he literally rebuilt her. She completely accepts his bloody history and the absolute darkness in his soul. The music swells, covering up the sheer tragedy of her surrender. The simple life lesson here leaves a bitter taste. Sometimes what we desperately call true love is merely the deepest scar of our own survival trauma. The camera circles around as she promises a life completely free of. It is honestly a heartbreaking delusion, considering the violent criminal empire operating right outside their door. They swap these scarred platinum bands. When Marcus officially calls them married, Nikolai pulls her in, kissing her with this desperate hunger, like a man trying to eat his own guilt. The reception is a surreal movie scene. Victor raises a glass, giving a speech about loyalty that is actually just code for mob complicities. Even Agent Reeves crashes the party, completely ignoring the missing paperwork. It brings up a simple life lesson about human nature. We will willingly sit at a table with actual monsters, pretending they are normal guys, just to feel a fleeting sense of warmth in a broken world. Watch closely as midnight strikes. The guests totally vanish, leaving the shop in this heavy, cinematic silence. Alara leans against him, pointing out the lack of gunfire. It is so tragic how she views basic peace as some crazy rare event. The lights dim as Nikolai hands her another envelope. Inside, tickets to Iceland, and a remote cabin reservation. 2 weeks of absolute isolation with zero cell service. Guys, this is not romance at all. It is the final click of a velvet trap. He is cutting her off entirely from the real world. When she asks about the syndicate, he swears Marcus has it handled. We need to swallow a simple life lesson about psychological control. A prison does not always have cold iron bars. Sometimes, it looks exactly like a quiet mountain peak on a fake honeymoon. The camera slowly pushes in on Ara, tracing the ghost of that starving girl she used to be. She is now the entire universe for a highly dangerous mafia boss. You and I know exactly how this snare tightens, right? She softly asks if he ever regrets catching her when she collapsed in that grocery store. He brushes her cheek, whispering that all the blood spilled afterward only proved their strength. It is a completely terrifying distortion of reality. He confesses he thought his soul was too damaged until she looked at him with pure trust. The predator finally found his mirror. This leaves us with a devastating, simple life lesson. We rewrite our darkest traumas into beautiful fairy tales, because admitting we are completely at the mercy of a monster is simply too terrifying to endure. The camera pans across the dark bookshop, dust floating in the moonlight as Ara and Nikolai plot a future built strictly on blood. The scene cuts to the dark interior of their car, gliding silently through those empty Boston streets. Ara rests her head against his shoulder, letting her tension drop. She tragically mistakes her deep exhaustion for genuine peace, completely confusing his ruthless mafia partnership with actual safety. In the shadows of the dashboard, Nikolai drops the ultimate lie. He claims he is walking away from the crime syndicate, letting Marcus and Victor sanitize his empire. But apex predators do not just retire. If there is one simple life lesson we must take away, it is that safety is often a total illusion. Peace is just the fragile space between violent storms. Picture this. The camera zooms in on Ara, asking this ruthless mob boss if he can actually walk away. His whole life is bathed in pure violence, but Nikolai pulls a massive narcissist move. His eyes go soft, whispering she is his universe. Boom! He just dumped the weight of his broken soul right onto her shoulders, and she kisses him. Fast forward 6 months. We are in a freezing bookshop, and Ara is shaking, staring at a plastic stick. 2 pink lines, absolute game over. A pure terror drops on her like an anvil. She is bringing a baby right into a blood-soaked cartel nightmare. The brutal life lesson here is incredibly simple. We all have this fatal obsession with thinking that the absolute darkest parts of a dangerous person can be miraculously washed clean by the pure innocence of a brand new life. Let us pause the frame right here, you and I, and look at her fractured mind. Even though she fears cartel retaliation, her twisted conditioning completely shuts down her logic. We watch her tears flip from absolute dread into a crazy, misplaced joy. Then the shop bell rings. In walks Nikolai, carrying the freezing vibe of shady street deals on his coat. His predator eyes lock onto her shaking hands instantly. She hands him the test. Look at this, guys. This terrifying Don who casually hands out death sentences is paralyzed by a tiny plastic stick. His cold mask completely shatters into a mix of pure awe and panic. He yanks her into his chest, swearing they will survive. But here is the raw life lesson. You can never outrun a violently toxic past just by slapping up fresh paint and praying the old bloodstains do not soak right back through the floorboards. The audio drops as Ara breaks down, terrified of corrupting this unborn kid. Nikolai grabs her face, swearing they will scrub the blood right off their family name. The boss is completely stunned that a ruthless monster like him gets to play happy family. But watch how his mafia crew reacts. The second Marcus hears about the baby, he starts drawing up armed guard rotations for a literal infant. Then you have Victor pacing around, plotting to put sniper teams around the crib. This is the brutal reality they are trapped in. They hide this entire pregnancy in the shadows, guarding the baby like a stolen diamond. Here is the quiet life lesson we all have to swallow today. Deep, heavy trauma never actually vanishes from your life. It just puts on a new mask, completely disguising itself as hyper-violent parental instinct and toxic loyalty. We get a massive time jump montage next. Ara is heavily pregnant, while Nikolai is aggressively trying to force his crime family to go legitimate. They move into an armored city brownstone, slapping yellow paint onto the nursery walls to fake a normal life. When contractions finally hit, Nikolai drives through the pitch-black streets with the cold focus of a military general crossing an active minefield. To him, the maternity ward is just another enemy base to conquer. 17 exhausting hours later, their baby girl is finally here. The second the nurse drops the infant into Ara's arms, the psychological steel trap slams shut forever. It teaches us a brutal reality about this life. The absolute strongest, most inescapable bars of our personal prisons are almost always built right out of the very people we desperately choose to love. Let us look at the absolute bitter truth here. The human brain will literally block out any nightmare just to keep itself safe. They actually name the newborn baby Mira. Guys, this is not some sweet act of forgiveness. It is a cold admission that the line between good and evil is completely shattered. A toxic love just breeds massive disasters. Meanwhile, in a freezing prison cell, the older Mira writes letter after letter. Ara leaves every single envelope perfectly sealed, building a massive emotional brick wall. We watch her staring at Nikolai, the same ruthless Don who built an empire on violence, gently rocking his baby to sleep. In that quiet room, her trauma bond turns to pure concrete. She completely traded peace for a constant war zone. The tragic life lesson here is obvious. The relationships we build out of terrifying fear and deep betrayal are always the absolute hardest ones to escape. The story drags us right into the suffocating tension of the aftermath. Their house is not some sweet family sanctuary. It is an impenetrable military fortress built entirely around a paranoid crime boss. You have terrifying, dead silent mafia hitmen dropping off velvet-wrapped baby presents. Boom, we smash cut to a cold prison. Mira is bawling against a concrete wall, projecting her desperate need for forgiveness onto the baby sharing her name. Back in the hospital, Nikolai holds his tiny daughter. The guy has hands built for breaking bones, yet he supports her with absolute care. It is a crazy visual, a ruthless wolf tamed by a sleeping newborn. He whispers that a monster like him never deserved this grace. Here is the true life lesson. No matter how deep into the darkness we fall, even the most violently broken people will always try to drag themselves back toward the light. Ara reaches out, running her fingers along his jawline to ground his spiraling thoughts. The camera pushes in as the boss bows his head over his sleeping kid. He makes a gut-wrenching promise to protect her from the cold, emotional starvation that literally turned him into a monster. He swears this tiny girl will never question her worth. Guys, it is a desperate attempt to snap a generational curse of violence. The lights fade as they sit there, entirely haunted by the bloody mountain of bodies it took to buy this peace. They wrote off every horrific crime as simply surviving. Stick with me here, because you and I can see something profound in this moment. We are learning a brutal truth about life. Genuine love, even when born in the absolute darkest depths, will always be the most powerful force we have to keep ourselves anchored to the world. The frame fades into a cinematic sweep over the Boston skyline. The freezing streetlights blur outside their bulletproof glass. This harsh city is exactly where their trauma violently smashed them together. Nikolai stares at Ara, his tough guy voice cracking as he drops a raw, desperate confession of love. We are watching how surviving absolute destruction can weld two shattered people together. The irony is off the charts. Sometimes the most insanely dangerous people actually become the safest hiding spots, using their lethal aggression as a giant protective shield. Ara used to be a hollow ghost, hiding her bruises under designer silk. But this boss caught her right in her freefall. He flat out refused to let her shatter. The life lesson is huge here. True strength is not about running away from damaged people. It is about getting down in the dirt to help them carry their absolute sharpest, most agonizing, broken pieces. Let us unpack this final act together. This ending is screaming at us to throw every normal idea of right and wrong straight out the window. Nikolai never faked who he was. He stood in front of her, dripping in rival blood, operating on an unhinged mafia code. Ara's ride-or-die loyalty is a tragic evolution of her captivity. She fell in love with the monster's terrifying shadow, simply because he used that darkness to block the flames from burning her. True healing is rarely a beautiful process. Sometimes, it violently forces us to hug the absolute sharpest edges of whoever is crazy enough to take a bullet for us. Their romance is constructed out of pure criminal chaos, but it is built like a titanium vault. We walk away with a powerful life lesson today. The exact same terrifying, protective obsession that saves a broken family is usually the exact same trait that makes people lethally dangerous. Let the camera hang on their messed up motives for a second. We watched Mira take an informant deal just to keep her daughter breathing. Her maternal instinct totally steamrolled her terror of mob revenge. The crazy part is everyone in this plot is gaslighting themselves. The shot shifts to Silas, weaponizing his trauma, convinced his rough past gives him a free pass to ruin others. Then you have Nikolai, who dresses up his controlling violence as heroic street justice. Ara willingly handcuffed herself to an apex predator, praying his teeth would only rip apart enemies. The life lesson here is chilling. Our brains will happily justify the most horrific crimes if it gets us through the morning. We love to pretend there are no villains staring back in the mirror, just victims forced into impossible choices. It is absolute terrifying self-delusion. As the final frame blacks out, we are slammed with this incredibly messy ending. People look at this romance and see a train wreck, a ruthless mafia kingpin crashing into a traumatized captive. But against all logic, they built an ironclad home out of pure psychological wreckage. The boss literally torched his underworld empire straight down to the pavement, entirely to fake this quiet family aesthetic. Listen closely, because here is the ultimate truth we must take away from this bloodbath. Our desperate human hunger for connection will always outlive our darkest, violent habits. Everyone is secretly terrified of dying completely ignored. When a shattered soul finally feels understood by another broken person, they will gladly set the whole globe on fire just to protect that bond. They grabbed onto each other while plummeting toward rock bottom. It is tragically disturbed and absolutely indestructible.